Hi, welcome to a very special bonus episode of Town Hall, a Black queer podcast with Bob's Drag Queen and Peppermint. The podcast where we journey through a theme by sharing stories, music, poetry, and art of varying depth and hilarity. Today's bonus episode would be just the two of us discussing the recent drag bans that affect us as part of the Black queer community. We are Black queer people after all. And you know, before we get started, Pep, I want to say that I ran into a friend of yours at the GLAAD Awards last night. Of course, in New York City, you can't throw a rock without hitting someone who knows Peppermint, you know. But I was on the red carpet with her, and we were side by side doing interviews, and then she, you know, I meet a lot of people who are always like, I know Peppermint, which I'm like, baby, she is a very famed and acclaimed drag superstar.
Well, talking about famed and acclaimed at the GLAAD Awards last night, you and the We're Here team, and then also you and Money Exchange, you had a double win for both Sibling Rivalry Podcast and We're Here. So congratulations on the. Now this makes your third GLAAD Award that you'll have at your actual statue that you'll have at your house, right?
This is my fourth.
Oh my gosh. Congratulations.
It was just a beautiful place. GLAAD. And I always say it's really great because, you know, I believe that shows like Pose and Legendary and We're Here and RuPaul's Drag Race are getting nominated and recognized at the Emmys and Golden Globes and stuff. But for a long time, the GLAAD Media Awards were the only place recognizing queer content.
Yeah.
You know?
That's the truth.
And to get recognition in the queer space for media, it was only from GLAAD. And I think it's because of GLAAD that these other places have now caught wind of how remarkable a lot of the work coming out of the queer community.
It's true. GLAAD does a lot of work. Most of it's behind the scenes. And so a lot of the time and effort, I mean, they work all year round. I think most people only, their biggest sort of connection or understanding of GLAAD is just the awards. But they do a lot of work all year long, working with, obviously, whenever a celebrity has, or someone in the public eye or a company has a moment that's, you know, seen as derogatory or anti-trans or anti-gay or something, maybe there's a statement that needs to be put out. And so GLAAD will work with those folks to make a statement, but also work with them to bring them to a point of, you know, education and enlightenment. And try to work to make sure that they understand why whatever they did was possibly wrong. But then on the beyond that, they work with, you know, I remember they were doing a lot of work with Twitter on, you know, revising. This is pre Elon Musk, on revising their transparency behind their hate speech regulations and guidelines. You know, particularly with regards to dead naming and so on and so forth. There was a really big sort of, along with this anti-LGBTQ wave, there was it was in fashion for a lot of, I guess I would call them anti-trans or possibly even right-wing creators and people on Twitter using, you know, the dead names of people. The most famous, I think, was when Elliot Page came out, Jordan Peterson, who's a content creator and a talking head who works under Ben Shapiro, basically, was really had like this campaign against Elliot Page and constantly dead naming him. And so GLAAD was working with Twitter to kind of curb that and make sure that, you know, that it wasn't just the individual who was targeted who had to try to fight against these things. Now those guidelines have been stripped away, but GLAAD has been working with a lot of other organizations as well to help, especially social media, since social media is such a big part of our lives, and it's where we get the news, it's where we communicate with people, it's where we build community, and it's also where a lot of people, you know, decide to spread misinformation and attack the LGBTQ community.
I always think about when I'm living and how lucky I am to be living now. And I always think to myself, I could have been born Black and queer 300 years ago in America. Oof. Oof. Woof. I think about that all the time. But not to have an existential crisis on on the on the podcast. How have rehearsals been for you?
They've been really good. I mean, but I don't want to also gloss over the fact that you also won a Peabody Award. I mean, just like
I did.
3 days ago. And so the awards just keep coming in, coming in. And before that, it was a Queerty Award. So you've had a really good
Yeah.
year. And I'm just so glad that we've been able to recognize and celebrate you and the things that you've been doing, and also the projects that you've been, that a lot of people have worked really hard for, like We're Here. I just think it's amazing, and it's just, you know, even though it is, GLAAD primarily, like you said, has been the main media recognition over the past few years. It is really great to see whether you're getting awards or not. It's just really great to sit back and be able to see, oh wow, this is what my friend is doing, and this is what the community is doing, and we have a really like wide array of content and stories that uplift our community, especially in this moment. And so this is a great, maybe this is an excuse for people to go back and start watching We're Here, or go back and listen to the thousands of episodes of Sibling Rivalry.
Yeah,
Go back a
we have
few
a lot.
years to 2020. Maybe they don't want to go back to 2020.
I mean, well, I think we started in
2018?
2018, and I
Okay.
would not recommend listening. It was our first episode. I edited the first 13 episodes. I edited myself, and they were really, really great content, horrible quality. So, if anyone wants to venture back that far, feel free. We have lots of other great content. That being said, enough about me. Let's talk about us. And by us, I mean the Black queer community. While Black queer people have to live our lives and make our money and take care of our families and
Mhm.
feed our bodies and exercise and try to enjoy art and culture
Mhm.
and friendship, there's also an onslaught of these anti-trans, anti-LGBTQIA plus in general laws, and specifically a big focus now is these the drag bans. You know, the conservative culture war against the LGBTQIA community wages on a slew of attacks on drag shows. Enacted multiple and has been enacted in multiple states nationwide, and some bills have even passed, which is kind of wild because it's kind of had that like an opposite effect. Like there's I feel like there's more drag in Tennessee now than they've probably
I
ever had over
know.
this amount
I
of
mean,
time.
speaking of Maren Morris, she was Maren Morris, Lizzo, um, another star. The name escapes me. Mainstream musician, when they've gone to Tennessee, even Madonna, I think, mentioned. I mean, she obviously has you on the tour, and there's lots of queer people around. Um, Beyonce has been used as an
Well, yeah,
example,
Madonna actually added a show in Tennessee after the drag band. Madonna added a show in Tennessee,
right?
so we weren't even going there before, but now we are going there.
Hmm.
And let's see if I make it to the show without getting arrested.
And it is really. I'm actually, a sidebar to the sidebar. Uh, you know, I love Beyonce. I think she's wonderful. She's not my number one diva. There's other, because I'm a little older, so the divas that Janet's my number one diva and always will be. But I think I was like super disappointed that we're not going to get we didn't have not yet gotten a visual album or music videos to support Renaissance. Obviously, it's a hit even
Yeah,
without it, but I am grateful to see that now that she's kicked off her tour, she has so many. I mean, I think everyone on the tour with her, I mean, in terms of the dancers, are queer, which is not that unusual. Dancers are usually gay anyway. Um, but she's got trans folks and non-binary folks on the tour. She has Jonte on the tour. I don't know if you remember Jonte.
what I know that name?
Jonte is a dancer and a musician. I guess Jonte is sort of like the the sort of the black southern version of Pablo Vittar. That's how I would describe Jonte. But Jonte's been doing it for for many years. I won't say how many, but more than 10. And Jante, it was one of the backup dancers behind Beyonce in Freakum Dress, in the Freakum Dress music video. And it was Ramon and Jante who were the two dancers in Freakum
Oh,
Dress. And also
I know
yeah, I
Jonte.
think they both danced with Beyonce on the Tyra Banks show when they did Single Ladies, because they were her first set of Single Ladies dancers. And so Jonte has choreographed for Beyonce and also obviously danced behind her with Ramon. But Jonte has a really fierce song called "Bitch You Better." Bitch you better, bitch you better, bitch you better, bitch you better. Oh my God, it's so good. So please go check out. Jonte is in the drag category, I would say, for sure. But Beyonce has Jonte on tour with her, and apparently all of the bathrooms, and at least this is the headline, the bathrooms in the venues that Beyonce is going to be touring are all going to be made gender neutral when she's
Yeah, I
touring.
love that. And yeah, I'm realizing now that I think I ran into Jonte one time when I was a baby queen or a little baby gay in New York City and was
Mm-hmm.
just blown away and
Mm-hmm.
probably quite attracted to to
Oh, Jonte is
Jonte. It was
so
like
fly
I
and
just
so
appeared like
sexy.
most
Gorgeous
amazing.
body, gorgeous, beautiful, like, oh,
Yeah.
just beautiful.
I think I was probably intimidated by Jonte being like, "Oh my God, you're so hot and so amazing." Um, and you know, Beyonce addressed it. She said, "A queen moves at her own pace," which I mean, you know what? She's right. We're gonna eat it up no matter when she could drop it in 10 years. We'll still eat it up.
It's true. It's true. I think it's not so much the pressure, but I was wondering how she would. I mean, it's one thing to have gay dancers, and I mean, not even, Madonna obviously did a lot when it comes to gay visibility and queer visibility to an extent in the 90s for sure. And even though these images and things and individuals were a part of her, I would say a part of her family and certainly a part of her creative team around a lot of her albums and projects and tours, especially Truth or Dare, which was obviously literally, the tour was made into a movie. Um, and there was, even though there was some controversy around that, um, she went the extra mile to sort of stand up and challenge and speak out um, beyond those projects. Uh, but she didn't necessarily have to, because the music and the things that she was doing wasn't necessarily about the queer community specifically, right? Um, you know, maybe it was adjacent. Like Vogue, obviously, that's not about like some straight football team, but it wasn't explicit in the material. Beyonce's Renaissance is what I would,
It's about queer culture. Right? It's about queer
yeah,
culture, I guess, like a queer
yeah,
culture.
it's very much, and it not only about, but uses and partially by the queer community, because they are so heavily featured, and she samples so many people's voices on the album and work from other people on the album. Even Vogue is on there, and and so I was thinking it would be really weird for Beyonce to have, like, these all this music and recordings with all these queer people and trans people on the thing and not have any of them in the video. And I was hoping that they wouldn't just be used as voices without really including them. And I'm grateful that she's finding a way to include these people in whatever way she can.
Yeah, I mean, especially in a time like this where visibility is important. I think this is why you see Lizzo bringing a bunch of drag queens on stage with
Mm-hmm.
her in specifically in Tennessee, so that people can, see the impact that drag performers have on people, the positive impact. I was saying last night, drag isn't dangerous; it's actually transformative and it saves lives. Um, and like a lot of art, drag is an art form, and art really does save people's lives. It truly does, especially for
Mm-hmm.
those of us who um, I don't know, who are artists. When you're an artist and you do it despite even when you're not making any money,
Mhm.
you realize like you have like you're just compelled. You are compelled to do it, even though it would probably be a much
Mhm.
easier path in life to try to do something else. I don't want to diminish any career, but to do another job, it might be a little bit easier and require less. You know, it seems like there's just like a big chance that you might not get any payback when you're trying to be an artist. It's wild. So I'm very lucky that I've been able to support myself for the past like basically 16 years as an artist of,
Mhm.
actually even more since I was 18. I've been working as an actor or a comedian in some capacity.
Mhm.
And I don't want to do math, but I'm older than that. I guess 18, 19 years now. Yeah, 19 years now. Um, And in terms of these, Tennessee and Florida seem to be leading the nation when it comes to anti-queer bills. Leading the pack in anti-drag legislation is the state of Tennessee, with the nation's first ever ban on drag shows performed in public spaces. Governor Bill Lee signed the provision into law on March 2nd. Since then, at least 14 other states have enacted anti-drag bills, including Arizona, Kentucky, Oklahoma, and Arkansas. Fortunately, now for federal judge has halted the Tennessee ban a day before it was set to go into effect on April 1st, citing concerns that it violated free speech, which it seems very obvious to me.
Mhm. What does?
Well, that there are some violations of people's freedom of speech and freedom of expression
Mhm.
in trying to ban drag shows.
Mhm.
And it's really weird to me. I mean, you hear a lot of conservatives yelling states' rights, states' rights, states' rights, and it seems like it's just an opportunity for them to enact their own bigoted behavior
Mhm.
and ideas on people who don't think the way they do, because they know that a majority of their representatives will uh
Mhm.
will fall in line with this kind of ideology and this kind of thinking. So that's why they're yelling states' rights, but also federal rights matter, and they're there for a reason, to protect people who don't necessarily think like the people who are around them in their liberal or conservative or whatever kind of bubble they're in.
I mean, that's 100% true. And then I can say, that's it's just true. But it's not new. And, Tennessee was hardly the first state to enact anti-LGBTQ legislation. Um, and I think as in the people, the architects behind this, the not so much the drag bans, but the architects behind the anti-trans laws are the same people behind the, you know, critical race theory conversation. And they just really succeed at taking a vague argument that's really difficult to pinpoint. The initial target, and this is something that I was really occurred to me recently, um, the target around the target of trans people. Trans people have been in the target since marriage equality passed, and they first really wanted to use trans people and bathroom bills and as an introduction to the anti-trans movement that they've been on for years. They didn't succeed with that in 2016. It just was really difficult because there's no real way to actually enforce bathroom bans and bathroom laws without having someone's actual physical safety and privacy being violated. And so they were not successful with that. Then a couple of years ago, they moved to trans people in sports, which they're kind of still there. But they had to use a lot of pseudoscience with regards to trans people. And it's just not accurate when you really peel back the layers. And I think they haven't really reconciled with, keeping gendered spaces that are, you know, only in alignment with the sex you were assigned at birth. They feel like maybe it's a victory to have trans women who they're calling men in the men's rooms and men's spaces. but they haven't really reconciled with the trans men who are most definitely men in these spaces, in women, in what they're calling women's spaces. and and so I think that they realize that there's a sort of a trap door or a back door into this whole conversation, like deep into the heart of the conversation. It's, and it's the drag bans. It's the conversation around drag, because drag is innocuous. It doesn't really have although drag can be used as a political tool, it's not a political group that can be defended against or defending itself, right? In order for, that's like them trying to outlaw like pink t-shirts. There's nobody there lobbying against or for pink t-shirts. That just means all the people who like pink t-shirts have to stop what they're doing to go over and march for pink t-shirts. Yeah. And so they realized that, which is why, while we're talking about drag bans, they passed 3 pieces of legislation in states that limit or completely revoke access to abortion. And they've been able to do the same thing with, do you see what they did with Rosa Parks' story? When they're come to, in the name of critical race theory, Rosa Parks, as we all know, and it's a shame I have to repeat it, was really the catalyst, one of the catalysts behind the bus boycott. And when she refused to give up her seat to a white person who was at the time legally entitled to take her seat, because she was sitting in the front and black folks were supposed to sit in the back. She refused. She was arrested, and then the bus boycott went into effect. And this really was the financial power, that part of the financial power that black folks had.
How they changed the story
back in the 60s. They just said, at first it was Rosa Parks. The first one was Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat to a white person because there was the law said that she had to, because black people had to sit in the back. Then there was the second version that said Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat to a white person, period, just because she didn't want to move her seat, not having anything to do with the law or anything to do with the segregation. They didn't acknowledge the fact that there was segregation laws in place, right? They just said this lady didn't want to give up her seat to a white person. Then they said they took out all mention of whiteness and said Rosa Parks just didn't want to move her seat.
So now it just sounds like a story about a lazy lady.
A stubborn lady, a lazy, stubborn lady.
It takes out all context. It takes out the fact that it was obviously in protest. You need context for it to make sense. Otherwise, it just sounds like some lady who's like, "I'm not getting up," and they arrested her. It's like, well, then why? And then, as a kid, I would be like,
well, that's the thing, and it brings the sympathy in for the police who stepped in. They arrested someone who wasn't following the rules, or whatever. Like, they don't even state what the rules were. They're just like, she didn't give up her seat. So, and it's like, good grief, so that happened last week, right? While we were talking about the drag bans. And now it's a part of the textbooks. And, Texas has been historically the primary, they're the ones, for some reason, textbooks in the United States are all created and moderated, or, sort of modified and created in Texas.
really?
And so, I don't understand why, but they always have been. And so a lot of the conversations about what's appropriate or what's not for kids or whatever goes through the lens of whoever's in Texas, on the, I don't know much about it, but that's where they come from. That's where they're printed. That's where they're written. That's where they're edited. And that's where they're controlled. And so Texas was able to modify Rosa Parks' story. And this is the story and this, mind you, there's also a move to get rid of Black History Month.
That's crazy. Yeah, I'm looking up right now. It says that almost
this is all happening.
I'm looking up right now. The New York Times says that almost all textbooks are pretty much either made in either California or Texas. That's so crazy. I did not know that. I did
Okay,
not
yeah.
know that.
Mhm. Yeah, it's McGraw-Hill, which we all probably remember if anybody opened their textbook, is the largest, publisher of textbooks for all grade levels in the United States, and it's a conservative company. And so they've always been at the helm, they've always had control. I think there are some committees that, they have to, there are some things that they have to include. And so I guess in saying you have to include Rosa Parks' story, for instance, well, they're like, okay, yeah, we'll include it, all right, and then they can just water it down and giving people,
Not to
I
interrupt,
guess, white
I found
children.
this thing where McGraw Hill has a company in California and one in Texas, and the book from California says this about white flight. It says, movement of some white Americans from cities to suburbs was driven by a desire to get away from more culturally diverse neighborhoods. And the one from Texas says, some people wish to escape the crime and congestion in the city. That's
Yeah,
crazy.
yeah, yeah. Some people, not even white people.
Yeah, some people it was just crowded and like crime. That's
Yeah,
wild.
yeah. So that's what they're doing. They're literally whitewashing or in the most direct and obvious definition, the history, while we are arguing about whether drag queens are raping children or not, and they're not. But that's what we have to be talking about. We're spending our time talking about that. And this is one of the things that really occurred to me is the fight for children. I always thought that it was disingenuous, which it is, right? The fight for children, the fight to save children from drag queens, from trans people, from, the indoctrination of wokeness or whatever that their enemy of the day is. And it's really interesting to me because at first, although it isn't disingenuous to me, like, for instance, if you're so concerned with the safety of children, why are you focusing on drag queens and not gun control? Because there was another school shooting just this week, right? And it seems like they're happening every single week. And when they do have the opportunity to talk about or spend any time or energy on school shootings, for instance, all they talk about is either thoughts or prayers or mental illness. And they don't even talk about mental illness in a way that is comprehensive and an attempt at all to really address it other than blame it. Like they're just, oh, mental illness. Well, let's put more money into, socialized medicine. And put more money into why is it so difficult to find mental health professionals in our country. There's so much red tape, and everybody can get by now that the insurance companies are a scam, and so why aren't we talking about that? Like that should be the number one cause of the people who are putting more energy into removing restrictions on guns than they are doing things to really address the fact that too many people can easily get a gun in this country, whether they have mental health issues or not. And so like that's not even included in the conversation, which is why to me it feels disingenuous. But it really occurred to me that like this move to address children safety and protecting the children, like ideologically, really has more to do with the fact that they are really heavily invested in keeping children indoctrinated into the system of patriarchy and capitalism. Because if the children are not focused on capitalism and the patriarchy, upholding the patriarchy, the rules of the patriarchy, the gender binary, and the sort of the differential in power between those with money and those without money, those with education and those without, and those with access and those without. If the children aren't learning about that at an early age, and instead they're learning that they can think differently about sex and gender and race and class, if they're learning that they can think differently about those things, then there's no one to hold up the patriarchy, which means these billionaire corporations don't have a connection to the future. That probably seems kind of esoteric, but I really do
I
think
don't
that
think
that
it is
is
too
what
esoteric.
is
I
at the
think it actually
heart
makes
of
sense, and
this.
I see a lot of people online saying stuff like just let kids be kids." But I think that a big part of being a child, not a big part, the main thing about being a child is that you're literally just preparing to be an adult, which you will be for most of your life, given that you live
Mm-hmm.
past 36. You know what I mean? And like that's what I think that's what blows my mind in terms of this idea that people just like don't want their kids to know that things exist. Meanwhile, what's going to happen when your kid becomes an adult and just never had access to the knowledge that people exist, people are different, to know that they're different? You know, what about the fact that your child, it seems weird, like conservatives just never consider that their kid might be queer. It seems like and I think it's because inherently they believe that queer people are made. Like you're turned gay, you're turned trans, you're
Mm-hmm.
turned bi or
Mm-hmm.
pansexual. They believe that
Mm-hmm.
it's like
Mm-hmm.
influences around you that make you into a non-binary uh lesbian. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I don't know, I find it hard to even be able to take it seriously when these people have want to ban Target for having a rainbow on a shirt. You know what I mean? And they include things like drag queen story hours, which have the this like they make it sound like they have this covert intention to like. Here's the thing. The drag queen story hour, which I don't I've never done a drag queen story hour. I have friends who do drag queen story hour. Harmonica Sunbeam, who we know, we just did an event with her in New York City. It wasn't a drag queen story hour. She did it just a regular show, a regular adult show with us. And have you ever done a drag queen story hour or anything?
I have read to some children. Yeah, it wasn't an official drag queen story hour. I mean, I think when we think of drag queen story hours, these are strangers, and it is like someone at the library or someone in that people who've never have not been in
Yeah,
contact with that drag entertainer before can just go to just like an event or a fair
were
or
you
it's a
ready for like
community event. I
cousins and
did
nieces and
go.
nephews? Like who?
Well, no, actually, one of my close friends, Matt Katzbowen, who plays who plays keyboard for Blondie, but guitar for me. His child, his children are queer friendly. They're raising their children outside of the gender binary and outside of the, with the understanding, like you said, that they could possibly turn out queer one day. And
And in the worst
so
case scenario, they
that's
might turn out to be
what
straight people. No, I'm just kidding. I'm kidding. Say it's straight people.
and so, and so that's how they raised their. I remember I thought like they're this rock and roll couple. They're no longer together, but they do co-parent. They're this rock and roll. They were this rock and roll couple back 20 years ago when I met them. And I remember they invited me to their wedding, and they worked with me at the drag bar and all the different things. Um, but I remember they were like, oh yeah, we're having our wedding. Um, the people, the business that's the wedding recorder, the wedding photographer and videographer are from this company we found. We love them. It's called like marrymegay.com. And I was like, oh wow, like they were really intent on like supporting gay small businesses, right? That were queer run. Anyway, but they asked me to go and do a drag queen story hour at their house for their kids and the at a birthday party with the neighborhood kids or whoever was going
How long
there.
ago is this? Are
So
these kids?
obviously,
How
all the
long ago is
parents.
this?
It was during the
Oh,
pandemic. It was like 2020, probably.
it's kind of weird to think about kids who I have encountered in my life. Like I saw this very tall drag queen at the GLAAD Awards last night, who came up to me and showed me a
Mm-hmm.
picture of herself at the age of 12 with me. I was like, oh, I
12.
said, not you being an adult taller than me. This is wild. I posted on my TikTok if you want to see. It's a picture. It's a video. Two pictures of me and this I can't say kid anymore. This young adult last night versus at Wigstock. Um, Obviously not the original Wigstock, the latest iteration of Wigstock that was turned into a an HBO documentary called Wig, which is available for you all to, check out online. But it was really just
Mhm.
kind of low key wild to be like, oh my goodness, they grow up so, you can't be a kid forever, you know?
No, you can't be a kid forever. And that's the let kids be kids is really the at best it is just a way of saying don't whatever you're giving to this child, I don't think is appropriate, and I want them to be focused on what I want them to be focused on, not what you want them to be focused on, like in the most innocuous way of defining that, or sort of explaining that. But really, I mean, what we all know what kids do. Kids have to start going to what before school. Kids have to go to preschool. Like, kids are instantly thrown into a sort of a system, an educational system that focuses on teaching them the tools they need to navigate the sort of hierarchies of capitalism. That's exactly what school is, right? And from a very early age, maybe not the first day, we start asking them, what is it that you want to be, and instilling like the four things that you can do in society that seem to be the pre-approved things before a child even expresses real interest in knowing what these things are, is either a doctor, a fire person, firefighter, a doctor, a firefighter. Maybe those are the two things that like kids, the professions that kids learn so much about, right? Um, and they learn about these archetypes of who they can be, but it really is only for the purposes of like what job you're going to do. Because when a 2-year-old says, I want to be a doctor, although that obviously could change, then parents start getting them doctor's sets and buying them toys to be a doctor, and then before you know, they're in 5th grade, and then like they're almost expected to know what it is that they want to do when they're older. And it seems to me that has more to do with how are you going to fit into society, and what job are you going to do, um, instead of what's going to make you happy, right? And I always found a fault with that, because I remember when I was younger, I'm getting off topic a little bit, but when I was like 10 or 12, it occurred to me that someone, I never had an answer for like if I want to be a doctor or a firefighter, because I didn't. And but and I always felt like, oh, I guess I'm some kind of reject that doesn't really know what they want to do, and I won't do anything. But it occurred to me, I think I was like 12 years old or maybe 10, that it's actually someone's job, and this was back in the 80s and 90s, to make like by hand Christmas ornaments. Now these days they make them in a machine. But it occurred to me, someone actually has that job, and I realized there could be creative people that get paid to do something that's not being a doctor or a fire person or a police officer.
I love that your first profession was gonna be an ornament maker. I found an old video, an old thing. There used to be this thing in my school where the teacher would shine an overhead projector on your head on profile, and then the other students would trace out your silhouette. And then once you traced out your silhouette, you would write, you would color it in, and then you'd write, or you cut it out on construction paper, and then you'd write out facts about yourself. And I still remember this. My favorite movie at the time was The Little Mermaid. My favorite color was pink.
Ah,
Yes, my favorite color was pink, and I wanted to be in my job. I wanted to be a candy maker when I grew up.
okay, a candy maker.
And I remember having to like argue, like she'd be like, "What's your favorite movie?" And I was like, "Little Mermaid." And she was like, "No, no, no, like that's not a boy's favorite movie. What's your favorite movie?" I was like, "I love The Little
Oh,
Mermaid." Like for me, it's Little Mermaid. Like that, like I know my favorite movie. That's my favorite movie. My favorite movie is Little Mermaid. Then she accepted it. She's like, "What's your favorite color?" I was like, "Pink." And she was like, "No, but okay, that can't be." I remember just be like going back and forth with my teacher, and I was in like I think 2nd grade, and I was like, "Man, I'm telling you, I know my favorite color, and it's pink. Like, lady, my color, I know what I like, and I like the color pink." And then, of course, she also was upset with my job as a candy maker. Actually, she kind of accepted like a child would want to be a candy maker. That makes sense. You're a child. You want to eat candy all day. But she was like, "You don't want to be a doctor or a lawyer?" I was like, "Nope. I want to make candy." I was like, "I know what I want. I want to watch Little Mermaid, and I want to make pink candy for the rest of my life, honey." Um, but yeah, it is really wild to me how some people just kind of inherently like not inherently but like naturally reject gender norms. And I wonder what it is about queer people that makes that happen. Like I don't even think I was like taught to like pink. I don't even like pink anymore. But as a kid, I just wonder what it was about me that made me like naturally reject gender norms.
You know, I think it really has a lot to do with the fact that like we see that nature doesn't even work in these binaries. I mean, you know, gender does exist and sex obviously exists, but I mean, in terms of as a sort of societal way of keeping us in our jobs, that's the most, it seems like the biggest value, the biggest function that gender and sex have, the notions of gender and sex have, that's the biggest value that they have in modern society. And you know, really that's for keeping people in control and keeping people to do their jobs and you know, without them deviating. It's a way for people to start policing themselves, right? I mean, in that woman, that teacher was doing her best to uphold the patriarchy and telling you that boys don't like this movie or this color, right? And that's an educator. And so, you know, teachers are only human. I'm sure she was a lovely teacher, but you know, that was another example of women, you know, upholding the patriarchy, which uses misogyny as its fuel, right? And so that was her unwittingly also keeping herself in line, because when she was saying that boys don't like this color and boys shouldn't do that, what she was also saying is that is only for girls, meaning girls have to like this color and girls need to watch Little Mermaid. And so, yeah, I mean, I think it's it's very natural though for people to go against and beyond and between all of the rules and the binaries. We see it everywhere in nature. We see it in different cultures and civilizations throughout history. We even see it in sort of Anglo culture back in England, like you know, in the at the 17th century and 18th century England, even 16th century England, we've seen you know, examples. I don't have any in front of me because I don't remember them, but examples of historic figures who operated outside of the binary and they were revered, you know, which is kind of in line with how other cultures around the world have you know, connected with you know, queerness and sort of non-binary identities, even if it's not exactly explained in that way.
Maybe the truth is that all people naturally, like maybe a lot of boys were told that they couldn't choose pink and they just listened to the teacher and just said, okay, I'll just choose a different color. Maybe my experience of choosing pink as my favorite color isn't the unique experience or the less common experience as much as not letting the teacher redefine my favorite color, not letting the teacher choose my favorite color for me. I wonder how many boys are like, I want to play with dolls. And they
Mm-hmm.
get told, no, you can't. And they just go, okay, well, I guess I can't.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, for
Like I
sure.
never even thought about that.
It's. I think it's. I think about it all the time, and it's. I do think about like you know our connection to our history and our motherland as people as a part of the African diaspora, and you know what's going on. What this kind of harkens back to what you said earlier at the beginning. What would I been doing? You know, I obviously would have been running around in Africa somewhere if we hadn't been invited. I'm being very
Invited.
facetious,
Oh
obviously,
Lord.
obviously, over here, and we would have been back there. And so, but then now I'm comparing that to like Uganda's anti-gay laws that are egregious and terrible. And you know, I thought for a long time that
But I
places.
don't think Uganda would have anti-gay laws if it
Well,
wasn't for
that's what I was just about to say.
yeah.
They've gone on record and said that we were inspired by the the policies that the states. I think it was either Arkansas or Alabama or New Mexico. I can't remember. Like they were specifically fashioning their laws and after one of the states here who recently passed anti-LGBT legislation, and then they just ratcheted it up to fit their own, you know, purposes. And you know, you think about these countries, especially primarily in Africa, but maybe even in the Middle East, who are anti-queer. And a lot of these places are places that seem to rely very heavily on, patriarchal, systems to oppress not only the women but also the men in those places. And some of them, not all of them, are places that have really adopted, your Western European colonialism into their, way of life. Uganda has a military that's fashioned after the British military. Has a, these are places that we're probably not thinking about these ideals, and we're not deeply rooted in Christianity until more recently, right? And so, I mean, I think, I'm just sort of rambling, but I have a bone to pick with Western Christian capitalist fundamentalist.
Hot take: Peppermint has a bone to pick with colonization. Listen, it's very brave of you, Pep, to come out publicly and
Yeah,
against
I think
colonization. And
it's
I
worth
know that
looking.
not a lot of
Can we
people
take
are
another look
willing,
at it now that we're here?
now that we're centuries into it. I think that Pep, I think you might be onto something.
I don't want to say anything, but I
Um,
think you might be onto something.
no, but I think it is really wild. I mean, I mean, okay, I always say that I haven't been doing drag that long, but I guess I have been doing it kind of long. But for me, it hasn't been that long because I have friends who've been doing it for much longer. Um, but I've been doing drag for 15 years now,
Mm-hmm.
and I just never thought that I know that pendulum swings. I know that like liberal and conservative, it swings hard back and forth, and I think the reason might be because when you get what you want, you tend to relax, and when you don't have it, you get angry and then you react, and then the other
Mm-hmm.
side does the exact opposite, and they react, and the other side does
Mm-hmm.
the opposite, and they react. It feels like Bush got elected, and then they were like, and then people who were more liberal were like, no, 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 we're going to get this back, and then we got 8 years of Obama, and then they were like, no, 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 enough of that, and then we got 4 years of Trump, and then we got 4 years of, we're getting 4 years of Biden, and it just kind of just swings back and forth with like conservative, liberal, all this stuff. And it's because we are in an extreme bipartisan system that I don't think we'll ever be able to break from, at least not in my lifetime. Um, but this would have been really hard to predict. I know you remember this. I years ago I used to do this thing called Drag Queen Weddings for Equality in Times Square. These demonstrations every Saturday from noon to 4, and I remember we vowed that we would do them in Times Square until there was marriage equality in the state, and then we got marriage equality in the state. And then I remember the last time we did it, it was like a big celebration. All these queens came out of Times Square. We had the flag. It was me, Miss Cracker, Honey Little Bronx, Frosty Fly, like a lot of my friends, Lily Heavenly, all came down to celebrate. Eugene Levandusky, and and then like I don't know, I just could not have envisioned this from that day. This was this like that they'd be actually trying to outlaw drag in public spaces, as if that has happened with any other art form that doesn't include nudity, and which which is the wild thing is, even in New York City, the entire state of New York, you can walk around topless anywhere you want.
Mm-hmm.
Anyone can anywhere, and I'm intrigued that in Tennessee they're trying to make it where you can't even wear the clothes you want to wear, even if your whole body's covered up. That's wild to me.
Yeah, but it's just so it's so.
How are these states in the same country? How are these states in the same country?
I mean, you could think the same way. I mean, you think the same way when you look back on our history with regards to, the slavery and the institution of slavery, and that there was at one point the North and the South, and who had, seemingly different views on slavery. But then, I was of course upset to find out that where we were, it was like empowering, but also kind of scary, but also kind of interesting, but creepy, but eerie, when Occupy Wall Street started. This is a whole nother lifetime for a lot of people.
Ooh,
Um,
Occupy Wall Street was such a wild time in New York City. That
yeah.
was such a
And
wild time.
for those who are too young to remember, after the sort of financial crash and the bailouts of the banks, which happened sort of on a smaller scale more recently, that the banks sort of, became unstable, apparently. And then they were, bailed out by the federal government. This time the banks were bailed out by other larger banks. But it was back, when that happened. Suddenly people, the idea that there was a shrinking middle class, and that the idea of classism, um, rather than conservatism and liberalism, sort of came into people's more in the mainstream consciousness, the haves and the have-nots, the 1% versus the rest of us. And that 1% was, that the talk about the 1% is, that most of the wealth in our country was at that time, has been for a while, increasingly is, and certainly is today, in the hands of the top.
Even worse
Yeah,
today.
worse. It's less than 1%.
The fact that there are less people in the 1% now is proof that obviously the problem is not getting better.
Clearly, it's not
It is
getting it. It's not
only
changing.
getting worse.
But anyway, so Occupy Wall Street was a long-standing sort of demonstration, set of protests that happened in the country, but then started on Wall Street in New York City, where people were going. These were people who, of all different walks of life. Many of them were young, but it was a very diverse group, for the most part. Or it was a diverse group. I can't say it was a very diverse group, but it was a diverse group of people of different jobs, different professions, different, even different ideologies in different regards, protesting and sort of, building an encampment. And it started with a march and a in-person protest that turned into, basically people sort of camping out on Wall Street, saying we're not going to move, and sort of symbolically taking up space on Wall Street in a way that we couldn't do it. We have no representation on Wall Street, if you're not involved in, the stock market and trading and investing in that. And if you're not a millionaire or billionaire, then Wall Street isn't for you. And so this is sort of my explanation of it, is the way that to sort of take up a presence there and really force the conversation, because with Occupy Wall Street, the conversation really made its way very successfully into politics in a way that I hadn't really seen at the time. Probably, I mean, I wasn't alive during Vietnam, but I would imagine the way that the politics, had to address the conversation of the protests against the war in Vietnam. When I was down there, I was I can't remember the name of the square, but there was the place where that was kind of considered home base for Occupy Wall Street, down near.
Yeah, I remember.
Yeah, that place was also the auction ground block for enslaved Africans coming off of the boats in America, and so the stock market was literally financially invested in the businesses that were I'm calling them businesses, but the plantations, yeah, that were operating in the South. And so although the North, New York is very much a part of the North, did not hold enslaved people. And it was not, you couldn't do it in New York. You could certainly earn money off of the businesses. I'm calling them businesses, but the plantations that were producing economically. People held stock in those plantations. The people who lived in New York, and that stock was traded through New York. And the enslaved people were auctioned off and sold in New York. Isn't that just wild?
No, it is wild. And I remember, and we should probably wrap up here soon, but I just remember watching Occupy Wall Street. It was the first time as an adult, I had seen such upheaval from so many people. And then, during during the 2020 resurgence of the Black Lives Matter movement, I remember seeing again and being like, oh my God, this feels like Occupy Wall Street again, which is where people have had enough. It reminds me of that scene, I've had enough and I'm mad as hell and I'm not going to take it anymore. It's from Network. I'm mad as hell and I'm not going to take this anymore. And I think that that maybe I think that people have to get madder. Love is great. Love is a great slogan. It is a great way to look at life. It is a nice positive outlook. But I do not believe that the appropriate response to bigotry and extreme capitalism is always love. I don't think the answer is always just love them to smithereens. Just love the love out of them. Sometimes you have to be mad and you have to yell and you have to make your voice heard and you have to cause a scene.
I've always been really involved in, advocacy and really been interested in the sort of public discourse around social justice. And I would often encounter activists and people who really had a sort of loud, in your face way and disruption as a tactic for getting their message across. And I really didn't have the opportunity to engage much with that idea, but can be jarring because it disrupts the flow of whatever's happening, and also the sort of the thought processes of what's happening with different people, and so like activism as and sort of crashing in and storming the stage or doing whatever was always. I always saw that as sort of, I always judged that as a way to, you're not going to do, you have to kill them with kindness. But then I realized like both are extremely necessary. You can't always win an argument or a conversation with people by insulting them and calling them names and like attacking them, because people don't generally respond as individuals very well to being attacked. However, attacking systems, like Occupy Wall Street, that wasn't like attacking one individual. That was attacking a system, and attacking these systems and disrupting the flow of these systems. I agree that it can't just be like, we're harmless, love is love. It reminds me of these sort of what people frame as the Martin Luther King nonviolent approach to the Malcolm X approach, which I know now has been terribly underrepresented, misrepresented, and skewed.
Yeah, I agree. Martin Luther King was nonviolent, but he was but he was very interested in disrupting, very interested in disrupting the flow of things. He just believed in not doing violence. I'm not violent either. I mean, I'm not nonviolent. I think there's a difference between being nonviolent and not being violent. You know what I mean? I ain't gonna turn the other cheek. I will.
You gonna bop me? I'm gonna bop you.
I'm gonna bop you back. But also last thing before we go, I want to say truly the last thing I would say is y'all. Listen, if you're still on the Republican ship, it is not too late to leave. They are arresting all. George Santos has been arrested. Donald Trump has been arrested. I mean, they're all out. But like, is this the party of criminals? I thought they were the law and order people. I thought they were the ones who they're breaking the law and disturbing the order is who they are. Like these motherfuckers aren't the law and order people. They are criminals. It is a party of literal criminals. Literal criminals.
Literal criminals, literal criminals.
And I can't wait till it's Marjorie Taylor Greene's turn. Anyway, I love you so much, Pep.
I love you very, very much. We want to keep a note to everybody to remind you that the thing that this is against all conservative beliefs, and there's a real measurable research into the benefits of drag performances. I mean, historically, we know the value of drag. If you're listening to this conversation, that you obviously found us probably through our drag. And the drag is obviously not going anywhere. So do not be afraid, and don't be afraid if you are a drag performer to continue to dress. If you are a fan and supporter of drag, this is a great time to express your support of the art form and the performers, the businesses that employ these performers, and also your desire to have those businesses be brave and bring these performers to those spaces. This is as good a time as ever to express all those things. And keep in mind that research on the emotional and psychological experience of drag indicates the positive benefits of performers. And I think that has a lot to do with the freedoms sort of it resonates from a drag entertainer or performance through the audience and then back to the performer. It resonates a freedom, obviously a freedom from the gender binary. It sort of pokes fun at the patriarchy and misogyny. And then drag can be political. It can talk about, It can advocate and talk about lots of different issues that are happening socially. And we need that language. We need those entertainers to continue to lead the cause. And drag entertainers have been at the forefront back during the AIDS crisis in the 80s, obviously during marriage equality. Drag entertainers have been, during Stonewall, they're at the front lines oftentimes to fight, because drag entertainers sometimes have the least to lose because we've already lost it in many regards. And so please continue to support your drag entertainers, and to the drag entertainers, keep expressing yourself freely and loving, accepting yourself and everyone else.
We have been and we will continue to be. Our season 2 debut is set to air during Pride Month on June 14th, and we're opening with a very special episode as part of a 2-part episode on the history of drag in these United States of America.
I cannot wait.
You know, I love drag. This may shock you all, but I love drag. It's in my name. It's in my name. It's right there in my name.
Special thanks to our production team, Charlene Westbrook, Corey Nixon, Tracy Marquez, Amelia Ritteler, and our fabulous music producer, LaFemme Bear. Thanks so much, everybody.
I will see you all on the 14th. Bye, everyone.